what's up, everybody? This is Ross from Planet X Filmworks channel on YouTube and the Zodiac Files True Crime series. Check it out, and shout out to Greg and the Gray Stage channel. Their content is amazing.
Are you interested in the paranormal? Murder mysteries, cryptocurrency, and thought-provoking interviews? Then check out Crypt Rick's I've Been Thinking on YouTube, or every Monday night at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Studio A at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Welcome to the Crypt.
Welcome to episode number 26, The Gray Stage. It's a review of Greg Fernandez's book, The Gray Stage, by Greg Fernandez Jr. We're on chapter 12 today of his book. My name is Dan Hennon. Welcome to the show, Greg. We got some good chapter to cover here, Greg.
Thank you, Dan. I'm really looking forward to this one. We made it past the whole paranormal thing, and this should be interesting.
So we're on Greg's book here, chapter 12. It's a chapter called Sister of Komel. We get into some of the Sidra information. Here's Greg's book here. Very good. If you haven't gotten it, get it. It's available free on PDF as well to read through it. We're going to be on page 106 at the bottom for today's episode. Once again, this is episode number 26. The first previous 25. We do one a month. And so we're in the third year of going through this book chapter by chapter, breaking it down. And that's where we'll start off today. I'll start reading it, Greg, and let me know if you want to interject any comments.
Sure.
Subtitle is called Guilty as Charged. Bottom of page 106. It starts off, Monday, January 19th, 2015 was the first time Detective Jim Gummert and Sidra spoke over the phone. Quote, Sidra advised me, Detective Gummert reported, quote, that she was currently residing with her father and mother in Hewitt, Texas. Sidra stated her mother is currently in hospice care due to cancer and not expected to live much longer. So that was the opening quote from Detective Gummert. The Alam family lived in Texas. That's where David met Komel. She went to Baylor University, and that's where they met. He was at a military base down there, and Sidra, the sister, was still living there with her parents. Continuing on, shortly before the Apple Valley Police Department released information meant to prove David Crowley was guilty of a double murder-suicide, I was able to ask Sidra some questions about the investigation. Sidra believed David murdered his wife Komel, his daughter Rania, and then shot himself in the head. There was a time when Sidra considered alternative views about the deaths of her family members, but that changed when she, quote, saw the facts. After seeing those facts, she knew the only thing that could change her mind, quote, would be if my sister came back and told me herself that David didn't do this, end quote. Now, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. She was very open to not really knowing what happened at first. She reached out to me. She reached out to you. She was in communication with helping kind of filter out some of the stuff that was on the Justice for David Crowley and Family Facebook page. I was in several long instant messages with her. You were, and she was very open. She didn't really know what happened. It didn't make sense. But then she had a trip to visit in Minneapolis, and then came home and basically says, David did it. I saw the facts. He obviously did it. Now, Greg, you and I and the rest of the Justice Group have since basically proven that David didn't do this. And so she was coming back with some, what she thought was facts, but I think was listening to some folks that, I don't want to say brainwash her, but really led her down a path where she actually, I think, honestly believed that David did do this. Yeah. So it's very troubling. once again, the evidence, you and I and the rest of the justice group are looking at the evidence, actual evidence in the case, not hearsay, not opinions on things. And there's really no way David Crowley did this. But she came out of that meeting with some of the friends of David Crowley, some of those members of the gray state or the gray stage who are poor influence, negative, and helping to push this official narrative. And she came back to Texas firmly believing that David did this. So that was, I haven't been in communication with her since. I have no real reason to talk to her. I think you have been, but it was very different. It was very different than once she came back with that from that trip.
Yeah, it definitely was. And to put this in the proper timeline, this is before the Eric Nelson's film came out too. So obviously after that came out, or when Eric Nelson's film came out, I think she kind of flipped a little bit back. I think some of her views maybe changed. Maybe she still thought David was guilty or whatever, but I think she kind of realized that the people who had been telling her all of these things, that they were not who they were not being honest with her. I think she, at the end, she did realize that. And so I think that was pretty clear. But it was very interesting how, yes, she was very, very open. And then here in these talks that I was having with her, she was very set on the fact that David was guilty. She's seen these facts, and of course, we kept wondering what are these facts that you have seen? What facts are they giving you? Because we'll give you the real facts if you're ever open to it, Sidra. We'll give you the real facts here, and maybe that will change your mind too. I hope she does keep looking into this, and I hope her family does too, that they keep looking into this and keep wondering and look at the facts. If you want to look at the facts, if you're going to take the time to listen to what these gray state goons have said, please take the time to listen to what we have to say regarding these simple facts based on the actual documents, not on our feelings.
Correct. It was the same group of gray state groups that was influencing the Apple Valley Police Department, the news outlets. They were the ones being interviewed on radio and television and newspapers. And we all got this very different version of the story. And then she went to Minneapolis and ended up hanging out with that same group and came home, believing that. Now, she was engaged to be married, and her wedding had to be postponed because of this, the killings. And so she now has since gotten married. She has a child. Her mother, who was in hospice at the time, did die a couple years ago, I believe. But this was back in 2015. This we're reading in the book here, and so people were really believing different things and really didn't know what to believe in. Hopefully, like you said, they did have a big segment in Eric Nelson's movie that her and her father Anjum decided they did not want any part of that once they found out what Eric Nelson and his crew were doing as far as pushing out this propaganda. And then I think at the same time then too, she did come to the realization that she was used also by the gray state group. And for a direct member of the family to be used like that, I think is pretty low. They did those types of things to us. We don't have a connection to the case. We're not connected to David Crowley. This was Komel's sister, and so very low, I think, to whatever they did to sway her thinking, and only to come out and realize later that she was used, and they used her as a tool to help push the narrative. I can't feel anything but bad for the Alam family for what they've all gone through.
Yeah, and it sounds like she didn't really know too much. They didn't really explain their pack theory to her. I really think the pack theory, that was really like one of the final straws there, when they were trying to say that it was a pact between David and his wife to kill their daughter. I think that's really when Sidra and probably their whole family were like, okay, these people cannot be trusted. There's really something strange happening here. And so I think at that point, it makes me wonder, what evidence did they really give them? Because they didn't have any at that point. So what facts could she have seen at that point? It just seems like more feelings. It's just more, you want to just get this over with. You want to just, but it's just really odd. I don't know. I have so many conflicting feelings about this whole thing, about this whole chapter, by the way. But really,
Yeah,
just yeah,
and Sidra, as far as being so close to Komel, and then they would do FaceTimes at the end of each day and do things, getting Rania on the phone and get some videos, and they were very, very close. Komel was supposed to be the maid of honor in Sidra's wedding. I mean, they were a very close knit. So the impact of this whole case, I'm sure, was very hard, and it may take years to unwind all of that thinking and to just let it all settle. It's the mother was in hospice care as well, dying. They were dealing with a lot of things and trying to juggle a lot of events, and being out of several states away while this was happening.
Yeah.
But you're right. She did say that she saw the facts. We keep hearing about this evidence and whatnot, and never really got to see what it was that we heard, what everyone kept talking about. So
it's true.
continuing on, it says that Sidra did not believe David was suicidal. Quote, but he was obsessed with my sister. I remember Komel told me she was done with him and couldn't do this anymore a year before all this happened, when she called my dad. I'm sure he started brainwashing her starting there when he realized she could leave him, end quote. Now there's a lot there. A lot of this is supposition and opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe or maybe not David and Komel were thinking about separating or divorcing or leaving. I don't know. We know that it had nothing to do with the murder, so it's more, again, just hearsay. But they got married. The event happened in 2014. She's talking about a year before this, in 2013. In 2013, they were just moving into the house in Apple Valley, getting settled, buying their own first real home, and getting Rania set up with her own bedroom. And so if all this was going on, I don't know. It's, once again, hearsay. Now, it could have very well been true.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is why some of those journals, because we keep hearing about her journal. Obviously, we have David's journal now, but it would be nice to get her journal, because some of the things that Sidra will say and has said, after this, after I spoke with her and everything, was based on Komel's journal. So there were some things in there that I'd love to read in the proper context too, because everything we were hearing about David's journal, once we got it, we were able to read it in the proper context, which I do believe is a lot different. But I'm glad that she said that David was not suicidal. That's a big point, because that even shows, even though she thinks David did it, but he's not suicidal. To me, that was like, it's a clear contradiction there. Okay, well, if you believe that he did it, but then, it's, so who is telling you this stuff? Who is filling your mind with this stuff? I'm not trying to say that she can't figure this out for herself or have her own view on it, but she was really close with David. So to hear her say that she is completely convinced, the only thing that would convince her that David didn't do this is if her sister came back from the dead and told her that he didn't do it. It's like, wow, I mean, that is a really harsh thing to say. You got to be a little more open. What should convince you, what should change your mind, is the facts, which we have here. And so that, to me, that's a very stubborn thing. That I thought she was being very, very stubborn. I thought it was still new too. Everything was still kind of fresh. Obviously, she didn't join the group, or she wasn't contacting us because she thought we were these great people. She had obviously heard bad things about us, and so she felt like she wanted to get her side too. That's the way that I don't know how she contacted you, but that's kind of the way that I felt. It was kind of like it started out with a lot of tension, and then after a while, it got easier, it got calmer, it got better. So that's why I still want to keep that door open, that I hope one day she will really look at the facts and not just look at whatever she was told back then.
Yeah, she reached out to me, and I developed a rapport with her right away, just helping to ease into knowing that the emotion was so raw on their end.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are not part of this, so we're distant and able to look at this from a different shade of light, but we're able to communicate a lot, and it was very helpful in doing that. by saying, look, we're running a page, the justice page. We want to get the facts out. We don't want to get them wrong or screwed up. Some things you may not like to hear. Some things you may not want to hear. And I said, again, recommended, please don't join the page. Don't follow the page. There's folks talking about this with all these ideas and opinions and scenarios. It's still too raw for any member of the family, the Crowley family, the Alam family, to be following a page like this where an investigation is going on really in real time in public.
Right.
On a page like that, there's a lot of things that were very raw, but I said, I will help out on, help tone it down. Some of the people were very offensive in saying some things. Some of the users and the posters on the user accounts in there were very demeaning and whatnot. So she'd reach out to me a couple times, says, help tone down this person. She didn't really say ban them, cut them off from the page, but really watch what they're saying. Give them a heads up that it's very offensive when she does poke her head in and read some of this stuff. And then when she came back, that was really it. She was very different, very changed when she came back. I wondered if it was someone else posting as her. I didn't talk to her live ever on the phone. I messaged with her, and she's very open, very respectful. I was very respectful to her. But when she came up and had her mind set up, it was almost as if I was talking to a completely different person. I did not know if it was actually her sending the messages. It did not seem like the Sidra that I knew in my limited time of knowing her. That's how different she was.
Yeah. Well, that's very curious too there, I would say.
She does say that David was not suicidal. Most people that was very close with David, friends, family, and coworkers, that lines up with everything they said. So we know that's a fair statement that he never was. But she does go to say that, out of her way to say that, he was obsessed with my sister. That's kind of a shot. I take that as a negative saying, the way she says obsessed, almost as a negative trait. And it gets into, she mentions that he was brainwashing her. That's another, this was now part of her throwing David under the bus, some of these lines and insinuations and quotes. So.
Yeah, and that sounds just like the same things we were hearing from Sean Wright, from Mason, so that's why I think they were actually brainwashing her to think that David
I would
was
agree.
Brainwashing.
I would agree with that 100%. The phrases that she started using and the terminology and bullet points and comments and words were all the stuff that we heard before from those guys, those same guys.
Right.
So I think they got to her, unfortunate as it was, she came out to be very different. She did look at us then in a very different light too. So they got, whatever they said was, they said Greg and Anna, the bad guys here as well. And we're like, I don't know what we've ever done to you, but she did not like us after that. And things became limited. You were able to carry on some more conversations with her, but I really didn't. I wish her the best. And I know she was married and having children and raising a family of her own. Wish her well.
Yeah, and that door is still open if she ever wants to come and do anything live or wants to share her thoughts or share her views. That door is always open. She's always welcome to do that. And so I don't know. We'll see. Whatever happens.
Hopefully that would be the case. I'd very much like to be in touch and get her feelings now as a couple of years has gone by and things have settled down. It would be nice to get a 15-20 minute interview with some of her thoughts. Who knows?
Yeah, showing her the actual documents, showing her the DNA and all of that stuff, all of the things that show that they can't really tie David to this crime here. It would be good to get her thoughts on that for sure.
Correct. Now, as far as moving into that house, I mentioned it was 2013 they moved in. The killings happened at the end of 2014, allegedly, and they were excited about that. Now, once he got the deal, and once he got the contract and the deal, there is email correspondence that contained both David and Komel dealing with real estate agents in the Los Angeles area looking for homes. So they were looking to move again once this deal got done. And so if she was ready to leave him, looking to leave him, wanting to end this and cut this whole thing off, that may have been, if that was, before getting the contract. Afterwards, I don't see it happening after getting that because he was on cloud nine. So was she.
Do you still have that? Do you have that on your website, that data? Do you know if that's public data or not?
Yeah, it is public data. I covered it on a YouTube, which was all taken down. I
Yeah.
should bring it up again because the email correspondence says as they were looking at homes and excited about that, possibly moving to California to be close to the production in Hollywood.
Yeah, that would be great. That would
So
be great.
that's something that maybe Sidra herself maybe not wasn't even aware of.
That's true. Good point.
But they're looking for the future, looking ahead, and very happy about this. Continuing on, it says, even though Sidra did not think David was suicidal when she was around him, she still believed he committed suicide. Well, that's fair enough if she believes it, but it's hard to believe, but she still thinks that he did it. Continuing on, Sidra also believed David wrote a suicide note. Quote, the note said to watch his Gray State new version video, and on the bottom of it, it said to submit to Allah now. It was in his writing. Our family can vouch for that. We didn't need comparison for the handwriting because we actually knew how he wrote. End quote. Now, you want to cover anything there? Should I read the next?
No, let's stop right there if you don't mind there.
So
For
this
sure.
is getting very interesting now. And she says that she goes out of her way here to say that the handwriting analysis, we think David wrote it, we can prove it. I don't think you or I have ever doubted that David wrote that in the notepad that was found on his desk, submit to Allah. Now, that wasn't David's handwriting. In fact, his
I would agree.
palm print or fingerprint was there. He did write it. So this means I think she was talking with these guys in the Gray State and saying that we were pushing this fake stuff. And she said so far, she went so far to say we can even vouch for that, this handwriting. I don't think any of us, you or I, ever said that wasn't. I do believe that was.
Sure, but in the group, and there were people saying that way back when, and it really in those early days, I'll tell you, Dan, I don't know how you feel, but I felt like a lot of this was from fake people, from people that wanted to push that out there, that wanted to show Sidra, to show the families, hey, look at the stuff that is going on in this group, and then somehow tie that to us. Whereas we both know, like, this is a freedom of speech thing. Like, you can say what you want to say. This is a public group. Yeah, we want you to be respectful, but obviously, there was no censorship going on there. Like, if somebody wanted to create this theory, if they wanted to say these things, they were pretty much open to. It didn't mean that we both supported it or even liked it or even agreed with it. And so I think she was getting little clips. People would send her little clips. This is just my theory, my thoughts. I could be 100% wrong. I think people were sending her things, making it seem like, hey, this is what is happening. And when those were like minor, very minor, minimal things, it was not the big thing that was being talked about in the group at the time or even now. Those things are going to happen, but if people are just going to focus on those one little things that somebody from a fake account may say, or even a genuine person who really thinks that, they're just sharing their views. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because we're not getting any information, because the police are not being cooperative with us, because they're not telling us anything. They don't have any big press releases out there saying, okay, this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. They're opening those floodgates to all of these different theories. So it was kind of really your job to really just kind of, have a forum where people could do that and then kind of filter it out. And then, so if people could say, you know what, okay, maybe I agree with this, maybe I don't, but I really feel like she was being just fed only certain things and was probably not being fed any of the data where you were saying, hey, we're not saying that this person is guilty, or not saying that. It was very, very, very twisted. I think a lot of the data at that time that she was getting, I think she realized that later on.
Yeah, the interesting thing too is I think what became abundantly clear was the two important facts about the case is the writing on the wall in blood. I think we all agree that David didn't write that. And whoever wrote the text message on his computer that was typed in a text word pad, that we don't believe that he wrote that either. So those were the big sticklers. If none of this ties together, if we can't tie the blood writing or the computer tablet, very little was ever talked about the tablet writing. And I think for the most part, we all agree that he did. So once she got talking to the guys, they went away from the big things that didn't make sense to the little thing that we didn't even say, and that's what they pushed. I think that Greg and Dan were pushing that he didn't write this, And she said, I can vouch for it. That's the way he wrote. And so right there, we're getting miscommunication somewhere along the line.
Yeah, it was basically because you weren't censoring these people. And even like Judy, a lot of other people were like, well, because you're not censoring them, then you must think that what they're saying is true. And it's like,
Correct.
it
We
doesn't
let
work.
everything, it was a wide open forum. And I let things go on and get posted and whatnot that I didn't believe in, and some things that I did believe in, and some things that I thought were kind of out there. But because it was a public forum, we had to let all that fly. Because if I started censoring anything there, I'd be accused of censoring to only be pushing you and I narrative.
Right.
And that's what we're not doing. That's why we left all this information out there, because that's what's happened in the past is people get out there and start a group and then start filtering. That's how they steer the narrative or the propaganda in their own direction. Whereas you and I were facing everything done and fact, evidence-based information. But while at the same time allowing discussion and discourse take place for people to just feel their way out, because we're always constantly grabbing new members. New members are coming in, some are leaving. And a lot of people are very interested in the case, and you can't slam it in their face and say, here's what we believe, and if you're going to join this page, you have to subscribe to this. We did not do any of that.
Right.
But
That's
it was
what.
interesting
Yep.
that once she talked to those guys, she came back and got off to a different kilter.
Right.
Things didn't line up. And it did say, open the most recent version of The Rise. So there was truth to that. The most recent version, I think, is the one that he was going to have published after all the other versions were going on. And whether it had Sean Wright's tax talk in there or not, it didn't make a difference. But what the Gray State guy says is, if you watch that most recent version that the public did not see, that Greg and Dan did not see, Sean Wright says it gives a very clear blueprint on what to do to put all this puzzle pieces together to know what really happened. And that's what they're saying is what I believe that they told her then too. When you put the blueprint together of the pieces, it ties back into how David methodically carried out this whole killing, is what they're going with.
Right. So
they don't show it to anyone. They don't show it to the police. They don't show it to us. They don't elaborate on what that blueprint was. But boy, when Sean Wright got a hold of that, he was like, it's all right here. It all makes sense. The passwords were left out. Here's the different views of the movies. Here's the different scenes. You have to watch them in a certain order, and the whole thing makes sense as to why he did this. It's basically that whole blueprint was his confession, David's, and his suicide note is what they led you to believe. And that's what they believed got Sidra to believe, is if you watch things in the right order and do it, it all comes together as a big Dr. Evil master plan, is what they're trying to make it sound like. And there never was any truth to that as well. There was many versions of The Rise. The Rise was the documentary David was working on, not the Gray State movie, but The Rise that he was working on with Sean Wright, that was about to go published, that he wanted to publish on YouTube for free, thus making Sean Wright not receive a dime for any of it that he put 3 or 4 years of his life into doing. And that's, I think, part of the main struggle of this was David not only cutting August Mason, out of being the lead actor in the movie The Gray State, it was pulling Sean Wright out of making any money on The Rise, and then wanting to do both things without neither of those two involved. And there's your huge, huge motive by cutting the two people out that were closest to him. And that's why we start hearing these different stories, all being created out of thin air.
Oh,
None
yeah.
of which were true.
Were true, right? I mean, even having David write it, whatever reason David was writing that, it's like it all takes from the Rise, from the old version, from the rough cut version that is still out there, that does talk about Sean's tax stuff.
Yes.
And so to having it on paper, hey, no, let's focus on the latest version here, on the newest version. It's very, very suspect. It's very, very strange. And how forceful that they were. And then at the same time, they want us to censor people. That's what they were doing. They were censoring people. They were not letting people comment if they were questioning David's death. Those comments would easily get taken down. My comments would get taken down. And then I was banned too from asking those things, from trying to show those things. It was all just, they wanted to be victims. They wanted to just show, oh man, this is a tragedy, but David is guilty. That's it. Okay, so let's go and let's make his movie. Yeah, let's make some money off of this. We know that in David's journal, David writes about how Sean offered, if David would give him $50,000, he could hire Sean Wright. Right? It's just a lot of very strange, weird things that went on there. So when you talk about that, and that just refreshed my memory for what David said, make open the rise, the most recent version, like, who is he talking to? Who is David talking to? This is like one thing where my thought was, is somebody forcing him to write this here?
And that still, I think, is more than likely probably the case. Now, we know Sidra wholeheartedly believes that he wrote it. And I think we agree with that he did. But that's not something David would have written.
Correct, because he's
Allah now is nothing David ever would have written it ever in his lifetime. He was interested in religions. He was very well read on different religions. He never would have wrote submit to Allah now. So who forced him to write that? Was there a gun pointed at his head? Was there, was there pressure there to write some of this stuff? Open the new version of The Rise. I don't think he would have written that down. He was the one doing the work on it. So he was probably only working with the newest version.
right.
But open the new version of The Rise directly impacts Sean Wright in a good way.
Right.
That forces the old versions to be pitched and tossed and thrown away. So Sean Wright needed that to be written for the new version.
Yeah.
This stuff isn't in the new version. So he needed people to be distracted onto this. So you have to look at who benefits on these phrases, who benefits on the things written, who benefits. None of this was David. None of this stuff is anything David ever would have done. But Sean Wright directly benefits himself from the latest version of The Rise. Submit to Allah now benefits the Gray State guys or whoever did the killings, because it ties into that whole mentality of the Muslim angle. There was no Muslim angle in David's life ever.
No,
Now,
I mean, David's
blood on the wall. We get the Quran. We get to submit to Allah now. Who was there making him write this stuff?
yeah, no, David's
I don't
in
think he ever would have written that in his lifetime.
yeah, I don't either. I mean, in David's journal, he doesn't say Allah. He says God. He says Christ. He says takes the Lord's name in vain, which I don't really like. But he's talking about God. He's talking about Jesus. He's talking about Christ. Not talking about Allah. So it's really, really weird, those two phrases, and how they just coincidentally line up with what these Gray State goons want and what is written in blood on the wall. It just coincidentally lines up with both of those. It just lays it all out there for him. So, but those are not a suicide note. They're not suicide notes, and I think that is that really needs to be clear. They are not proven suicide notes.
There was not a single suicide note written by
Right.
David anywhere. There was
Right.
no suicide note. Were there notes left behind? Yes. Were there notes written? Were there alleged things done? Yes. All those things. But after meeting with the Gray State guys, Sidra now wholeheartedly believes that all this was suicide notes. And so that's where the frustration is for you and I, Greg, is that none of these, we have to repeat to the new listeners and the members out there, none of these are suicide notes. There is no suicide note in that house.
Right.
Now, it does go on to say the note allegedly written by David Crowley was found on the computer desk in David's office. The page was flipped open and read, "Open the Rise, most recent version, submit to Allah now," end quote. That note is not listed as a suicide note, I reminded Sidra. Now, this is coming from you now, Greg. You remind her in talking with her that that's not a suicide note. It's listed in the evidence for the investigation to the case, but nowhere does the Apple Valley Police Department consider that a suicide note. And you have to go out of your way to remind her, because she's going down that trail trying to make you believe that it was a suicide note. You reminded her, Sidra, and the police have said there was no suicide note. There were only 2 notes. So hats off to you, Greg, for setting her straight, saying there's only 2 notes. the police department themselves, the investigative unit, said there was no suicide note left behind. There only was 2 notes. And so you have to remind, Sidra, who's the sister to the victims here, to Komel, and she's not even seeing it that way. And you got to point out this very elementary fact. I'll repeat it, fact. Because she was going off, she was going down going off the rails there. And so you tell her that it was not a suicide note. There was no suicide note. The police themselves said it. But she goes on to say, quote, "It's a suicide note. Duh," she responds. "If there was no note, then I'd be more suspicious he didn't do this. Can't you see it's a play on words? Terrorists say they kill in the name of God. This was all done to spin stuff so his movie could get attention because he couldn't do it while he was alive." End quote. That's a loaded statement right there. And I'm not a fan of that statement at all.
Yeah, me either. No, me either. That's a
So
pretty harsh thing.
That tells me that someone had gotten into her state of mind. Someone had gotten into that door and started pushing this stuff, spoon feeding her. And the problem was, sadly, she believed it because now we get some of these same quotes coming out again. They wanted to promote the movie. They wanted all this added attention to help the movie, which couldn't be successful if he was alive.
Well, because that's what the family was thinking. We hear it from both sides. They thought the movie was dead. And reading this, and up until you actually spoke with the guy David was working with, I thought it was dead too. It was only your video that changed my view. And it's like, okay, maybe the movie wasn't dead. Up until that point, I thought the movie was completely dead too, because that was the only information that we had. So thank you again for actually
everything that came out, Greg, whether it was in the news or the radio or the press release, or press reports, or the guys from the Gray State, all said that there was no contract, there was no deal, there was no movie. And so everyone was heading down that line, and that's why it tied into David being suicidal and depressed because he got turned down for the movie. When we find out later that it was not the case, those wanted to do the research for that video. It's my interview with Mike Boggio III. Mike Boggio III, and I get him on the line himself on an actual phone call and recorded, and said that he said no, the contract was, we signed it, we're ready to go, we're ready to move forward. We're just waiting for David to clean up some loose ends on his side from the legal aspect, and that also makes sense because David was hung up on this whole contract rights with Danny August Mason to sign over his rights, which he didn't do. So they were in this holding pattern. But the contract was legit. The contract was approved. The contract was signed. They were moving forward with doing the whole movie deal, which got lost everywhere along the way. So yes, for those new members or newer following this case, go back and watch that video. And even you may want to link it to the bottom of the description of this one, Greg, because that was a big turning point of this entire case. Once again, it's a fact. There was no opinion. It wasn't someone's opinion or a suggestion or someone's idea of what may or may not have happened. It was coming from the president of the entertainment group's mouth himself. The mics. Said the contract was in place. We were moving along. It got green lit. They were moving forward with the whole production.
Yeah, right. and it only ended because David died. That was it. And that was shocking to me.
They wanted it to move forward. And so what she also gets is kind of negative toward you in her writing here. She's got to throw in there. I'd be more suspicious if he didn't do it. Can't you see it's a play on words? She brings up terrorists. It got to be very juvenile very quickly. And I know that, Sidra has since changed after this has all come out, but it just shows that I feel bad that they had to get to her like that.
Yeah. Yep. I'm with you on that.
Now, the next section on page 108 is the title heading, Who Died First? Still in the Sidra section. It gets into who died first. Now, this is very interesting. I'll continue on here. It says the murder weapon was found next to David's left hand. Yet in several photos, David can be seen firing a weapon with his right hand. even though David was the one who taught Sidra how to shoot a gun. Remember, this is not Komel. He also taught Komel, I think, but he actually taught Sidra, the sister from Texas, how to shoot a gun. That's how close they were. She wasn't sure if David was right or left-handed. We know who died last, if we are to believe the official story, which would be David. But who died first? Was it Komel or Rania? Next, the quote starts, "The hardest pill to swallow for me and my dad," said Sidra, "is that David probably made Rania watch all of this," end quote. Sidra was convinced that her sister died before Rania. Their bodies are so close. So if Rania got shot before Komel, their bloods would have mixed. And Komel's blood is the only one on the wall. Rania's blood was nowhere. So where do you want to go with that, Greg?
Yeah, so I think that's a big point there because obviously we don't know who died first, who died second, who died last. Catherine and William have recently did a video where based on the mold, it looks like David may have died first. I get where Sidra is coming from here, because if you just look at what she's being told at this time here, it's just like, okay, well, if Komel obviously, and here's the weird thing. I know I'm jumping all over the place, but here's the weird thing is if Komel died if Komel was shot where she was found, if Rania was shot where she was found, there would be blood. Their blood would mix. So that was the first time where I was like, wow, okay, so their blood is not even mixing here. How can that be? Rania, we don't know if Komel was shot there. It doesn't make sense that she was shot there. She may have been laid there. So then Rania wasn't shot there either. She may have been laid there too. So the bodies were both set there purposely. They were staged. They were staged to be where they were. And that's what really got my brain thinking. It's like, okay, maybe there's something to this theory. And I think it's totally accurate now. But she's it's almost like she doesn't really realize what she's saying here. It's like, yeah, how could they have been shot here? How could they have died here? If their blood is not there, if Rania was shot there and then laid on Komel's back, that makes no sense. Where Rania's body makes no sense. Where her body is, where all three bodies, let's be honest, where all three bodies are, it makes absolutely no sense. And so that's why I ask her, how can this be here? Like, we don't know who died first, who died second, who died third. But what she is saying here is exactly what the Gray State Goons were telling us. Everything she is saying here, whether she realizes it or not, she may agree with it. She may honestly agree with it, but it's exactly what they were trying to feed us. But the evidence, the documents, the facts do not line up. So when she's talking about, I've seen the facts, it's like, there are facts that you probably have not seen then that you need to really look at or take a second look at with an open mind. Years later, this is a great time. 7 years later, it's a great time to go back through all the documents. Now that we have them, you can reread them all. You can look at all of it, and maybe you will keep an open mind to some alternative theories than what we have been fed, than this brainwashing theory about David Crowley. Where these bodies are makes absolutely no sense. Rania could not have been killed there. That means she was killed somewhere else. If her blood is not on Komel, she was not killed there. So anyways.
Yeah, the biggest crux of this whole case is the more than likely that where they were found was a secondary crime scene. There was another crime scene, and this was not how they ended up. They were staged there, put there, possibly laid there. What it comes down to, from if you're thinking facts and evidence only in your head for this case, it really doesn't matter who was killed first, second, or last, and who did whatever. The order doesn't even matter. The question you got to take a look at is that they were found there, more than likely laid there, put there, or whatever. The sequence is out of place. Anyway, the thing that we have to remember here, if you put on your psychology hat, what's the thing that they tell Sidra? Is that Rania was forced to watch this. That's a very emotional charged statement. None of us are bringing in emotion at all here. We're talking about facts.
Right.
So the Gray State goons get to her, and what do? They don't talk facts. They don't talk about evidence. They start bringing emotion into this whole thing. This is a niece that Sidra loved, and they planted in her head that she more than likely was forced to watch it. What is that leaving you with? David's a bad guy. David's horrendous. David's awful. That's the underlying reason that they planted these seeds, is that you don't need to bring emotion into this. They did it on purpose because she was going to bite on that. And she said, it's still hard for a swallow for me and my dad to know that this was happening, which also leads me to believe now that maybe Anjum believes this too. Maybe Anjum believes there's a reason to the order of the killings. You got to take a step back in a situation like this and remove who was killed first, second, or third, because for the most part, it doesn't matter there. David didn't do the killing, so therefore, yes, it's important to somewhat the order of when they all were killed from the big picture. But if you're trying to think that David did this, who killed first or second? Was it Komel or Rania? Now you're in an emotional game. Now you're spinning your wheels because you're never going to get the answer.
Yeah.
And your only situations are visualizing what happened are going to be emotionally charged. Emotions are going to be coming into place. So for Sidra, she latched right onto that and said, that's a real tough pill for me to swallow because I can't imagine she was forced to watch it. Well, I would be more concerned of why was her arm pulled off? That to me is the thing that bothers me. But they don't bring that in. Why was there a fractured rib? Why was her arm missing? What torture was done to the girl? Those are the things that are up here in the importance level of actual questions Sidra should be questioning.
That's right.
But so someone got to her, fed her this stuff, and she believed it. But what they do, the ingredient that you can tell, and these guys are good. These guys are good at it. They're adding the ingredient of emotion into it, and she's going to latch onto that. And that's what leads me to believe here, all the stuff that she's saying isn't evidence or fact-based. It has emotion tied to it, which means someone was planting these seeds in her head. This is all a psychology. And the Gray State guys are very good at the psychology of all this. That's why they also got exposed, I think, because there's those of us in the group on the Justice page that are at the next level above and can see right through this.
Yeah, it's a very harsh thing for somebody to tell her that Komel had to watch, or that the daughter had to watch this. I mean, why would you even say that? Why would you speculate?
That's downright nasty, the fact that you brought that up.
Yeah.
And once again, the beginning paragraph talks about the left or right-handed gun. We got the photos. Everyone said David was right-handed. Sidra didn't know, but that's irrelevant at this point. He was a right-handed guy. He always fired his shots right-handed. The gun was next to his left hand. His right hand was missing. That should be the point of contention here. Where was his right hand? And why on earth was the gun found next to his left hand? You know, you got to almost look at the number of mistakes made in the crime scene staging. A lot of mistakes. And that's, it's the theory of the facts, the actual evidence and facts. These things wouldn't have happened that way. They wouldn't have. So we already know it's a staged scene, but like you said, we still don't know if it's a secondary scene or if there only is one crime scene. We know what a beating took place there. We know what the cast off and the blood and the medium velocity blood spatter at the scene, that a torture and a beating took place there, but there was no high velocity blood spatter coming from a gun. A gun would only produce high velocity blood spatter that would have been all over the walls, the ceiling, the carpet, and large soaking stains where the person died. The only one that we had actual evidence of, is the bottom of that recliner cushion that was soaked with blood.
Sure.
Now, strangely enough, none of the three bodies were near that cushion. So we already know something's goofy. So you almost have to look at the number of mistakes that were made by those staging the crime scene. Now, the reason we were, I guess, poking fun at the Apple Valley Police Department is that because us as armchair investigators found this stuff. that didn't make any sense. Anyone in investigation class 101 in college would know these things. This is what they do for a living. They're detectives for their job. And none of these things raised alarms, set off alarms, raised their antenna. How could that be? They obviously weren't found there. This was a secondary crime scene or something. The crime scene at the Apple Valley house does not make sense. But I feel bad for Sidra with what she was going through. Now, Komel's blood is the only one on the wall. We agree with that. That's a fact. As far as writing on the wall, that's what you're alluding to here in your book. It's not spray, not splatter, but written on the wall is Komel's blood only, not mixed. Is what you're getting at, right? Okay. And so we got that. That was also proved. We already know that. And we didn't see any of Ranya's blood anywhere. So you go on to say, in talking with Sidra, how can that be? I asked. He didn't kill her yet. Quote. Sidra also believed Komel and Rani were hit in the back, quote, and that David shot himself in the mouth. Other shots around the house, Sidra continued, showed he tried to hit the dog but was unsuccessful. I actually laid down where David's body was and acted like I had a gun and lifted my hand up like I was trying to shoot an object. It was at the height of the dog. Quote, David shot at the dog while he was on the ground? Quote, I asked. That seems odd. I'm going to stop right there, Greg. There's so much.
Sure, go for it.
There's so much here. Now remember, the only people talking about shooting the dog was the Gray State guys. It's the only one who ever brought that up at all. And now she's saying it. So we have this living dog after we have this living dog, and we've got these accounting of the shots that don't add up, and somehow it gets planted into the narrative that he was shooting at the dog and then unsuccessful. Well, David's a longtime military man, veteran, and was very good at shooting. He more than likely wouldn't have missed a dog, but they had to account for these missing shots, I think. And so they had to tie this together. There was the shot through the floor that missed and they found in the basement. And they were talking like there was shots all over the house that he kept shooting and shooting and kept missing the dog. Well, that also wasn't true. If you look at the facts, there were several gunshot holes, but none that alluded to him trying to shoot the dog, right?
Right.
And so we get a lot of this sidebar opinion stuff that's now introduced that Sidra now believes.
Yeah, there could have only been one shot where he would have tried to shoot at the dog, which really doesn't make sense. And that's the one that goes into the living room floor, that goes into the basement. So there are not shots. So I don't know where she got that from, that there were shots. There would, in theory, there would have the only thing possible would have been one shot. That's it.
Well, and that's a good point, Greg. What we're contending here is the multiple plural, the S on the end of the shots. A shot, I'd be okay with that. A shot that shot the dog, maybe. I don't know. But whenever they meaning the Gray State goons, they kept saying plural. He was shooting all over the place. And I think Judy was mentioning that too when she first got onto the page after she talked to the Gray State goons. She made it sound like there's shots all over. Once the photo evidence, she always said, Judy was very big into this. Judy, the neighbor, was saying, when the crime scene photos are released, you'll see that there'll be gunshots in the kitchen island all over the place, right? So we said, okay, that's fine. We'll wait for the photo evidence to come out. Well, the photos were released, 464 photos. We looked everywhere. There was nothing in the kitchen island. There was a shot in the floor that came out into the basement and landed in the wall, but that's one shot that missed. The island was a drop of blood or something, that a shadow or something on the island, kitchen island. And so David was not shooting haphazardly his weapon to kill the dog. Like whoever said that, we looked at the photos. There was no shots. There only was, we have the number of casings, the bullets, the fragments. So who started that narrative is the question.
That's right.
Now, she also says that David shot himself in the mouth. Well, that also, we have the autopsy. There was the entrance here and the exit out the back or something.
I don't think they have. I don't think they know where the bullet actually entered, and I think that's why she thought that.
I see.
You know, and because that's the only thing. Oh, he must have shot himself in the mouth. Which to me, okay, that makes sense. It doesn't really line up with where the exit wound would be, but they also got that wrong a little bit too. So I mean,
well, I think Catherine or Michelle had done some videos in the past where there was the shot came in on the left or the right cranial and exited on the other side or toward the back.
Okay.
But the only narrative, once again, now once we get to the narrative and we get all this ingredients into what Sidra now believes, the only way you would get that is that they said maybe that David was kneeling, had his head down, and they had to account for that ceiling hole. They said that's why I think they introduced to her the shot was in the mouth because it had to go up and he was kneeling down and doing it. Well, we already know that the shot did not go in the mouth because it would come out. It was planted. The information was planted. They need to account for that ceiling shot. And if he would have been standing up or sitting and shooting normal, the hole would be in the wall horizontal, not up there. So they had to introduce this, that this was doing it. This is how it was done. Sidra believed it. And so now she comes on and tells you that he shot himself in the mouth. And shots were around the house, all around the house for the dog, plural. Komel and Ronnie were hit in the back of the head. I think she means they're killed, shot. And that I think that's a fact. That's a true statement, I believe. Now, she does not go out of her way to say that Komel was shot 2 and possibly 3 times. See, they don't give her that information, which is now, we find out later, is a fact also. We had overkill on Komel. If David did it, he'd shoot them each once and himself and be done with it.
Right.
So they don't tell who's ever planting the seeds into her head of this information. They keep the facts conveniently out all the time. Those pushing the narrative in, and that's what she's biting on. They're fishing, and she's taking the bait every time. And now she so believes it that she's telling you this, and she's telling you this as fact. And most of this stuff isn't fact at all. It's what she thinks. And she even laid down where the body was, lifted my hand up like I was going to try to shoot the dog, and it was at the height of the dog. I don't
understand that. Yeah, I don't understand.
The height of the dog was shooting, was the hole in the ground. I had said many times, and this could still be neither here nor there, is if killers and perpetrators are standing there and torturing them to let them know that they meant business, it could have, sometimes you'll see an assassin, shoot down into the floorboards to wake them up and let them know, hey, we're serious here. We're not messing around. I've suggested that from the very beginning, and we can neither say that's here nor there. But she said the hole was at the height of the dog. Well, whether the dog's, shooting down, maybe shooting down at the dog, height doesn't make a difference. But if shooting down at it, the only thing that would be accounting for a hole in the floorboards. Now, she said, yeah, quote, he was on the ground trying to do some creepy ceremony. Now, right there we can end. There was nothing about a ceremony that anyone said in any of the reports and anything we saw as far as the facts.
That was only Sean Wright was the only one that I ever heard that
Sean
from.
Wright was from the beginning saying he was trying to do some weird ceremony, some kind of enlightenment thing, that he was setting his music to play the Ascend. And he was in some weird ceremony, and it was part of it. Well, she was talking to him because he was part of the Gray State goons that she was talking with, and now she believes this too, that David was doing a ceremony. The only time that ever came up with Sean Wright. So once again, why is he planting this stuff into her head? Obviously, he had lost it. That's a very important quote right there. She says there's no way he's going to commit suicide. He never was suicidal, but obviously he did it, which means the only thing that I can account for it is that he lost it. He went off the rails. Everything went sideways, and he did all this. We also know that's not true. So she's believing what they're feeding her at the same time.
Right.
This was the very first time I heard about some kind of ritual or a ceremony by David, though Sidra didn't elaborate on that comment. Paranormal activity was mentioned. Well, it gets back into that paranormal, whether that was happened or not, doesn't make a difference in the killings, but she may try to now point it to that, saying he was trying to get rid of something maybe in house,
Yeah.
doing some weird ceremony. Well, continuing on, that's when I began to seriously consider the possibility that a demon was following the Crowley family. If David dabbled in the occult, as Mason Hendricks claimed, since David publicly claimed to have a, quote, soft spot for the Antichrist on social media, since David had a Bohemian Grove owl statue in his office bedroom, I had to consider the possibility of demonic involvement in this case. Now, that's a fair statement. Greg, that's a fair statement. You put all these things together, you had to leave that open as a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah, and they may have known that too. They may have, because I was very vocal about it, so they may have been feeding her information to feed me information, so to take me off of the trail is kind of a possibility.
And I don't think David ever dabbled in the occult. That's Mason Hendricks claiming that. Once again, he's part of that Gray State, the Goons. David was very well versed and did a lot of research on religions, nationwide world religions. He was well studied in all aspects of those things, which I'm assuming one has got to entertain the fact that he probably was into this Satanism as well, and in the occult as far as studying and learning more about it. But to say that he dabbled in it, that's a very negative connotation.
Yeah,
and the very pessimistic overtones are attached when you start saying someone dabbled in it. And once again, David didn't do that, but that's Mason Hendricks feeding in to saying that.
Yeah, because dabbled, because I mean, he really used the word dabbled too. That was a quote. I can quote him on that. That
dabbled, when it comes to a cult, there's only one use for the word dabbled, and it's negative. It's a bad connotation. Mason Hendricks also knows that, so he's going to insert these phrases in there as another way to demonize David, just as another throwing him under the bus.
Yep.
I don't know anything about a soft spot for the Antichrist. I don't know.
Yeah, with David. Yeah, that was a quote from David's Twitter where he does say, and I do have those quotes, but he does say that. Yeah, I have a soft spot for, and I was like, well, that's kind of weird.
Well, that's also a tongue in cheek kind of a almost saying it in jest. That's almost
I hope so.
Comedy purpose.
I hope so.
The only way someone would say that.
Yeah.
And that could be actually very funny. If you didn't mean it that way, it's who says that?
I don't know. Why would you have a soft spot for the Antichrist? But
well,
we also need to look at how David grew up too, because there are many Christians that grow up, and they don't have the best Christian background or the best Christian, following. So there are a lot of people that grow up and they become anti-Christians. So they kind of well, I'm not really into God. I know Jesus Christ, but they start looking at the devil in this weird light. That maybe the devil is a victim, just like all these Gray State Goons are trying to play victim.
That's interesting. Now, he did have the Bohemian Grove statue look like a little miniature size replica of that, and I don't know if someone gave that to him or how he got that, or we don't know if it was a movie prop. Nothing yet, but that is a fact that was in the photographs.
Yeah, and that's tied to David's 2013 script, because the Bohemian Grove is in David's 2013 script. So like you said, it could have just been a prop, something that was meant to kind of inspire him. But I'm very curious to know who made that, why, and what David's view is, because he doesn't really talk about the Grove either. So I'm still very curious, and it's not mentioned in his journal or anything like that either. But if you read David's 2013 script, the Bohemian Club are the bad guys. They are the villains, and they are sacrificing children. And that's directly from David's 2013 script.
Interesting. So that also makes sense. In closing, it says, for Sidra, there was no doubt that the Crowley family witnessed paranormal activity before they moved into the 1051 Ramsdale Drive, Apple Valley home. If true, I wondered, this is you, Greg, saying, when did the paranormal activity end? That's a very good very good question. We know that there was a fact at the previous apartment in Minneapolis that they had some spirit paranormal activity in that previous place. Now they get to the new house. Your question, and rightly so, is did something follow? Did something else kick up? Did something else happen? We don't know if anything did. But you have to entertain that for your book because we still don't know the complete summation of what's all going on.
Yeah, I was actually shocked that made it into Eric Nelson's film, where a lot of stuff did not make it into his film, right? They didn't talk about the bullet in the ceiling. They didn't talk about a lot of the facts, but they made sure to bring up the whole paranormal thing for a good reason, because they were trying to pretty much say, okay, if you believe in this stuff, you're crazy, basically. So you're just as crazy as David. David believed in this stuff. David thought this stuff was happening. Komel thought it was happening. They're crazy, and if you believe it, you're crazy too. So I felt that was the kind of relevance of this.
The other thing with the Eric Nelson film, the documentary that they did, is that anything like this that was even had a slight chance of demonizing David Crowley, they threw it in.
That's true.
Demonizing the family, demonizing Komel. They picked and cherry picked those negative instances, knowing some of these topics that would reflect on the public viewing it, watching it, would have a negative connotation with. They brought those things in and slapped it in there. And that's another reason that we can tell that this was a propaganda hit piece. It brings all these kind of negative, throw David under the bus things and inserted them and kept some very, very important evidence and facts not even in the film itself.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's a great place to end it right here.
That's a very interesting chapter, and we don't mean to berate Sidra in this, but this is actually what she was thinking at the time. This was where her head was at, and so it is what it is. I think that she's changed now, and I think that she's understood how they used her at the time. But these quotes in your book, Greg, are fact. These things came out of her mouth.
Yeah, and she can always come back on if she wants to clarify some of this stuff, or if her views have changed. Well, I'd love to get her back on, or to get her direct quotes so that people can understand where she was coming from then, and if her views have changed, or if they stayed the same too. If she wants to actually double down on some of the things that she said here, I think it would be good for everyone who is researching this case. We would love to hear from. We would love to hear directly from Sidra.
I agree. That's a good spot to end here for this episode. Very good chapter, Greg. I think we're going to have a part 3 now coming.
I think you're right. I think you're right.
There's a lot in this chapter, and it's very good things that you can actually take. A lot of good nuggets in here. And once again, your book is based on facts, so we're getting this information out there, and it's this whole chapter so far with the Sidra stuff. It's coming out of her mouth as things that people have put in there. They're not based on facts, not based on evidence. And I think that's where we can look back and not laugh, but we look back and just say, what were you thinking? Well, who was telling you this stuff? Because now, as the facts have come out, we know that these things are not true. They aren't correct. The real question then was, who was feeding her these lies? And that's the question that I have. But that's all I've got for this chapter.
All right, my friend. Thank you so much. And until next month, we'll come back again.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, my brother. On March 14, 2015, detectives Brian Bone, Jim Gummert, and Sean McKnight met with Dan Crowley Sr., Kate Crowley, Dan Crowley Jr., Allison Crowley, and Sidra Alam at the Apple Valley Police Station. We presented the facts of the case to the family as of that date, Detective Bone reported. No details or information were withheld. All information was discussed, and all questions were answered to the best of our abilities. The biggest problem is all of the information that the police didn't have at that time. Did they meet with the family after they had everything on October 7, 2015, when the case was ruled exceptionally cleared? Where was the resistance to the exceptionally cleared conclusion? All that stands between the baseless accusations and the people looking for answers is us. We're the only hope at getting to the truth now. Everyone else has failed to bring us the truth. Where is the truth movement here? Where are the Oath Keepers? Where are the 3%ers? We Are Change? The Ron Paul Revolution? The next revolution will not be televised, probably because it has already been infiltrated by informants and spies and gatekeepers and traitors. For years we have been told that we are the resistance. But what exactly are we resisting? Do we recognize tyranny when we see it? Do we still believe a man is innocent until proven guilty, whether he is dead or not? Our silence is compliance, and our vigilance is irrelevant if we avoid the simple truths. Case closed? I don't think so. Unless you can prove David Crowley guilty, this case will never be closed. It's time to choose a side. A long time ago, the Gray State trailer told you you need to stand now or kneel forever. Today I am reminding you to stand now for David Crowley and his family, and keep standing or kneel forever and drown in a pool of shame. Those who panic and those who lie fade away first. Those who support getting justice for David, Komel, and Rania Crowley will stand forever. Do not resist, in truth persist. Do not stray into the night, stand in the light. You have nothing to fear when you keep Jesus Christ near. Why would anybody rule this case exceptionally cleared? And yet on October 7, 2015, that's exactly what the Apple Valley Police Department did. With everything that they had, knowing all that they knew, and they still closed the case and tried to lead everyone to think that David Crowley was a murderer, a child killer, a domestic abuser, someone who snapped and went crazy. One of the biggest questions that I get all the time, well, if David didn't do it, then who did? It's a fair question. I would also answer that with a question, I guess. If David did it, where's the evidence? Is one question more valid than the other? I believe so. I don't believe we have to prove somebody else did this to prove David Crowley didn't do this. I think they're two separate questions, both very important, both questions that need to be answered. But if we cannot answer the first question, which is what proves David Crowley guilty, then we have to understand that means take a look at what they knew. What did police know on March 14, 2015? What could they have told David and Komel's family at that point? Knowing that they were still waiting for the autopsy reports. They were still waiting for the BCA lab results. They were still waiting for David's Dropbox information. It wasn't even until March 24th, 2015 that Detective Brian Bone received a copy of those autopsy reports. As of April 17, 2015, Detective Bone also reported, I have still not received results from the BCA regarding fingerprints, and I have not heard from Dropbox. On April 24th, Detective Bone received and began to review the contents of David's Dropbox accounts. You want to take a guess what he found? I'll let you figure that one out. It wasn't until May 5th, 2015, that all of the Dropbox files had been gone through. Guess what evidence they found to prove David Crowley guilty? this is closing the case? They didn't receive the firearms report until June 2nd, 2015. The bloody latent print tests on the alleged murder weapon were inconclusive when they got the results back on August 5th, 2015. They went through all of the electronics. The Dakota County Electronic Crime Scene Task Force reviewed all electronic items. Guess what they found? Yet, with that conclusion of not finding anything, they just say David is guilty. Here's what Detective Bones says. Throughout this investigation, the ABPD has not discovered any information or evidence that shows anybody but David Crowley is the perpetrator of these crimes, including the killing of his wife, child, and himself. Listen to that statement. Reread that statement. Throughout this investigation, the ABPD has not discovered any information or evidence that shows anybody but David Crowley is the perpetrator of these crimes, including the killing of his wife, child, and himself. So you would expect to find maybe a list of things that the Apple Valley Police can say prove David Crowley is guilty. You would expect to see that when Tom Lydon talks to them. You would expect to see a final summary saying this is based on this ABCDEFG. This is why David Crowley is guilty. What they're really saying is because we couldn't find ABCDEFG and because we couldn't find ABCDEFG for anybody else, David Crowley is guilty. You see how twisted that sounds? See how dumb they think we are? You see how easily some people can be tricked, can be fooled, can be led blindly to believe something that is not true. It's very easy when you look at this case. It can happen to all of us. But if it... And yes, that's why many people have been looking for who did this and why. And why all of the other weird stuff surrounding it afterwards. But it all boils down to the same thing. Innocent until proven guilty. Then you start looking at how quickly people were accusing David. Even after looking at all of this information, by the time 2016 comes, everybody has chosen sides. Everyone who was able to look at the evidence, everyone who was able to look at the autopsies, to look at the DNA proof, to look at the fingerprints, the firearms. What side did you choose and why? I hope there's still many people that are on the sidelines that have not chosen a side yet, but it's time. It is really time to choose a side. Stand with us or cower forever. And we'll wait. Alright, wrapping this up here, let's talk a little bit about the term exceptionally cleared. It does not mean guilty. It really doesn't. If it did, we would have a lot more. Exceptionally cleared. Now, I contacted the Apple Valley Police Department to find out what exceptionally cleared meant and got the following response. Exceptionally cleared indicates the case is satisfactorily concluded and prosecution of the suspect or suspects is not being sought. These cases may have been referred to another agency for follow-up. The victim may have withdrawn complaint, parents to handle discipline, or a verbal warning issued in minor offenses. I also asked, would this include if a suspect is deceased? Likely, yes. Are you confused yet? Are things becoming a little more clear in the midst of that confusion? Think about that. Think about where we are, why we're here, and how it really doesn't take much effort to keep understanding, to keep on this case, and to keep reminding people and letting you have shown your hand. You've shown your true colors. Unless you're scared. Unless you're scared of something or somebody or some power. Doesn't make sense to me why you would assume David Crowley is guilty and stick to it. Enjoy the silence, I suppose. I don't know how you could enjoy it. Sometimes to look outward, we have to look inward. We have to look within ourselves. With a case like this, you do have to look within yourself. What type of a person do you want to be? Did they look? And how deep did they look? How much could they have possibly looked? If within a day, within 24 hours, if not less, they are accusing David Crowley of being guilty and saying the public is not in.
Hello everyone, this is Sophia from the Gray Stage podcast, and I'd like to invite all of our listeners to join the Justice for David Crowley and Family group located on Facebook, where we have almost 4,000 members. In this group, we welcome discussions regarding the case and have all of the documents located in the files section for everyone to review. If you like, you're welcome to visit Greg Fernandez Jr.'s website called The Gray Stage. It's located at thegraystagewordpress.com. You can find his book and all the official documents for this case at his website. Lastly, I'd like to introduce you to Catherine Michelle, who's a part of this podcast. Catherine Michelle has a YouTube channel under her name, where she mainly discusses the Crowley case. So please feel free to stop by and give her channel a like and a listen. Until our next podcast, keep seeking the truth and justice for David Crowley and his family.